Hi, Phil Aston here from Now Spinning Magazine with another tribute video, and this one is based around Iron Butterfly, and it's Doug Ingle. And as I do with any tribute video that I do, this video is dedicated to Doug's family and friends and Iron Butterfly fans from around the world. And I think the best way for me to do a tribute to Doug is to probably talk about my journey to this band, and also to point you towards references, because again, when I do these videos, I don't presume anyone who's watching is an expert in this band, and I like to think they're like mini documentaries that will help you discover more music as you go through your life. So Doug Ingle, Iron Butterfly, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vidda is the album I'm holding up here. And the thing is, and this is kind of like one of those puts things into context moments, every member of the band that made this album has passed away. And that is one of those things. It doesn't mean everyone we're like connected to Iron Butterfly has passed away. There are still members from the original album, and the band is still ticking along in some various forms. But everyone who made this classic album has passed away. And I think there's something about that I just want to touch on, is that because one of the things I will be pointing out is this box set from Cherry Red. I've done a separate unboxing video, detailed look at this box, but it's very well put together. And the reason why I wanted to reference it is that when you look through booklets for things like this, and you see all the posters and you see all the band when they're looking really young, and in the notes, because some of the band members still around when this pulled together not that long ago, is the talking about they went in the studio and the lead guitarist was 17, and how they were kind of all the other bands around them, the Doors, etc. An exciting time it must have been, and all their life was ahead of them. Such adventures they were going to have. They didn't know where it was going to go, where it was going to lead. Music, rock music, whatever you want to call it, was just so embryonic back then. Everything was possible, and all of that has closed. But we've been left with the music. And my journey to this band was it took a long time. I grew up in the early 70s. So I'd be buying magazines like Rock Scene from 1974, this is, where it did a thing about heavy metal thunder. And it kind of mentioned the beginnings of heavy metal. And it mentioned bands like The Kinks, Iron Butterfly, etc. And mainly the track In-A-Gadda-Da-Vidda. But I thought, well, I didn't... Going back then, in record shops, records went out of print really fast. So by 74, 75, a lot of this stuff from 67, 68 had already disappeared. So there were still compilations like The Age of Atlantic, which had a song on there called Termination from that album. And it didn't connect with me. It was years later. And actually, when I bought this, and one of the things, if you're thinking, why is this so important? I say it's so important, why it's a cornerstone in rock music. Iron Butterfly can sometimes be seen as like a proto-heavy metal band. But they weren't really. They were called Iron Butterfly because they wanted to be heavy, iron, and light, as in a butterfly. And the way a butterfly's life evolves to literally be able to go wherever they wanted to go with their music. The story behind this mammoth track that takes up the whole of one side of a record is charming and full of a sense of wonder. Legend has it, and I've read this in several places, that Doug Ingle had been drinking a fair bit of wine to release the creative juices as he was writing music, as a keyboard player and the vocalist. And one of the band members had come home where they'd been like serving pizzas, and they said, what you been doing? When Doug was obviously in a heightened state of awareness. I think wine gives you that kind of buzz more than beer probably. And he kind of wanted to say, I'm working on this song. I've come up with this song called In the Garden of Eden. But because of the influence of the wine, he said, it's In-A-Gadda-Da-Vidda. Thinking, obviously, from his perspective, he'd said In the Garden of Eden. So it was written down on a napkin as In-A-Gadda-Da-Vidda. And it kind of stuck. Now, would history have unfolded a different way if it had been called In the Garden of Eden? I think it probably would have done, because In-A-Gadda-Da-Vidda was like weird, but in a nice way. Because the late 60s and the early 70s and the way rock music was going, if you think about, what was going on here in the UK, all these band names like Aardvark and, all these strange names we had, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vidda just fitted in. But what it also had was it took up the whole of a side of an album. Now, for those of you who haven't been interested in rock music as long as I have, you probably think, because we're so used to now of progressive rock bands having tracks that last 30 minutes, almost two sides of vinyl in old money. But back then, it had never been done before. I know early 70s, Yes, we're going to do it. Genesis were going to do it live. Deep Purple were doing it with Space Trucking. But this was a studio track in amongst 1968. We've got Cream, we've got Hendrix, we've got Engelbert Humperdinck and Stones and the Beatles, the Kinks, whatever. The Doors were stretching out with long songs that took up, about 10, 12 minutes with the end. But this took up a whole side of an album with a drum solo, 3-minute drum solo in it as well. But the fact is that this happened by accident, really. Because the other tracks on the album are like 3 minutes, 4 minutes, etc. And this one is 17 minutes long. They go to the studio, and what happens a lot, they're all set up, and the sound engineer needs to get the levels and get everything right and while he's setting up. And he says to the band, can you just play through something while I sort things out, in behind the glass, etc. And so they played In-A-Gadda-Da-Vidda. And what's interesting is, because many times now when I've been in the studio, is that you're told to do this and you start to play a song and you're kind of keeping an eye on the guy behind the glass in the control room and you're waiting for him to go, and then you'll just stop. But obviously they didn't do that. They just kept playing it, and they just played it as if the way it had been evolving on stage. So they just finished the whole thing. Afterwards, when the engineer came out, they were just expecting him to say, okay, we're ready to roll. And he actually said, I actually recorded that, lads. And he'd recorded it as they'd done it. And that is the take that was kept for the actual album. There was a couple of overdubs, I think, a guitar and maybe a bit of vocals were done, but that was it. Now, I find that a lovely story, because nowadays, I think with a track that's that long, a lot of you musicians might go in and record a section, get from that to that, and then they'll do another part, then it'll be stitched onto that, and they'll basically cut and paste it into position. And of course, with modern technology, which is good, the band may not even be in the same room with each other. So each individual musician can take multiple takes if they're in their home studio until they think, no, that's the one I want to do. And then they send it off. And again, it's all assembled digitally. So this is 4 young guys in the room looking at each other, playing this song in real time. Now imagine if they'd been told, right, we're ready now, guys, let's do a take. This trying to explain how the difference, the dynamic of when you record a piece of music in a studio, when the red light goes on, to when you don't know you're being recorded. A lot of musicians find it quite difficult to let go and think, oh my God, I'm being recorded. This is going to represent me for the whole of my life. So sometimes, because the money's been charged per hour in a studio at that time, you'll think, well, I don't want to overstretch myself, because if I make a mistake, we're going to have to do it again, and then everyone else has got to do it again, because the amount of times back in those days, if somebody made a mistake, the whole band had to play the whole song again. It wasn't just, well, we'll just drop in the guitarist at that part. Many times back then, when it was only like 4, 8, 16 track, the whole band had to do it again from the beginning. So I feel that what was captured here is 4 guys really chilled out, really in the zone, playing music joyfully without any pressure of thinking they were being recorded. And I think that's what makes this such a special track. And it has a drum solo in it. Now, you probably know that I'm not a massive fan of long drum solos, and especially on studio tracks. But you know what? This one really, really works. It's Ron Bushy on drums, and it works because it's so rhythmic. And I know some of you are thinking, well, it's rhythmic, it's drums. What I mean is, a lot of times back then, especially at the birth of musicians stretching out, there was a sense of really going over the top if ever you had an opportunity to do so. The song has a real vibe. It has a real, the kind of that riff, dun, 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 dun. It's almost hypnotic, and the drums kind of follow this pace, and so it's a very musical drum solo. I much more prefer this to Toad by Ginger Baker, around the same kind of time zone, really. But it's very rhythmic and very musical drum solo. But you've got the guitars, the jangly guitars, the great 60s organ, sort of Hammond in there, the vocals. It's a fantastic experience. And depending on your entry point, because it's interesting when you look online. I don't think I've got it in front of me, have I? Oh, I have. Iron Butterfly Live. This came out in 1970, but it was recorded in 1969. There's a live version which is even longer on here. I love it. But you'll see people online saying they either prefer the studio version or they prefer the live one, because it depends where you came in. So if you came in via the studio album, then I think you're just drawn to that. But I know a lot of people went with the live version first before they heard the studio version, and that has become their favourite ever since. This is so that's that track, and that's what you'll see in the press all over the place now, talking about In-A-Gadda-Da-Vidda as like, the last surviving member of that band. But as this is a tribute to Doug Ingle, I just want to mention some other things, because the lineup changed for Iron Butterfly, but he was always there, especially during this period. And so the other ones I'd like to just mention, if I've got it around me, is this album, Heavy, which was kind of, if you're thinking about the kind of birth of heavy metal or hard rock or whatever you want to call it, having an album called Heavy was cool, of course. But of course, that word heavy back in the late 60s meant things are heavy, man. But the track on here, which I think was years ahead of its time in many ways, is the Iron Butterfly theme. So for those of you new to Iron Butterfly, listen to the Iron Butterfly theme first, I would say. It's a shorter track, but it's absolutely superb. It's just a great instrumental, and it's just really 60s proto metal. It's just great. Then listen to In-A-Gadda-Da-Vidda. There are many other places you could go. Ball is good. But where I'd probably like to take you is Metamorphosis as the final port of call for this tribute. And that is because I want you to go to the track called Butterfly Bell. Have I got that right? I think it's the last track. It's 14 minutes long. As you know, my pronunciation of some things is always way off. Yeah, Butterfly Blue, Blau. It's 14 minutes long. It's also one of the first examples of someone using a voice box for a guitar. Now, it's very experimental, that particular section, so it might take a few moments for your ears to adjust before someone else in the house might say, "What is this you're playing?" Because it sounds strange to ears in 2024. But either side of that is just beautiful blues rock music, but not in a kind of obvious way. Well, I suppose it wouldn't be an obvious way. It's 14 minutes long, but it's beautiful. And I know the band themselves, a lot of them, this was their favourite album. So they were a great band and they're worth exploring. I can't recommend that too much really, because it was so well put together. It's 7 CDs. At the end of this video you're watching now, when those little links come up at the end just before I disappear, I will put a link to the unboxing of this set so you can watch it. But this would give you everything you need for Iron Butterfly, and it will obviously give you a great booklet and the full story of the band. So today I've already played these, but for you, if you're thinking about your playlist, and again for those of you exploring via streaming to start with, but make sure you buy something afterwards to support the legacy of these artists, is the Iron Butterfly theme, the Iron Butterfly Blue, and of course In-A-Gadda-Da-Vidda, in the Garden of Eden. So thank you to all the musicians who played on this classic album. Erik Brann, do you know he was 17? He was 17 when he made this record. Can you imagine being 17 and you don't know, you're making a record? It's exciting, but you don't know the effect it will have on the world around you. And Bushy on drums, Doug Ingle on keyboards and vocals, and Dorman on bass. All of them, sadly, no longer with us, but the music is, and it's quite easy to find now. So enjoy. So thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Please take care, and remember that music is the healer and the doctor. Keep spinning those discs, and I shall see you all very, very soon.